Hey, John, you have about 35 beautiful humans and source keepers from all over the world. Say hello. Everyone say hi to John. We have folks from Brazil, from Europe, some people coming from Mexico, from all corners of the US. So it's a really special group of humans, and I'm really honored to bring you into our field. You're already in our field. Your teachings, your wisdom, your leadership is already very much here. There's a lot of your students and your fans in the room. Um, for those who don't know, Dr. John Churchill and his wife Nicole, they run, we could say source keeping in our language. They source keep Planetary Dharma, which is a multi-year program that I'm just beginning. So I'll let you explain it later in more detail. But there's several students who are in that program that are in this room, and yeah, that's one of many initiatives, Sean, I would call as a visionary with a scope of mind for what's possible in this meta-modern culture that is already here and also coming online simultaneously. And so there's so many different places that we can go. And I really invite in all of your participation and curiosity and inquiries. I have some questions and places that we can go, but I'm really most interested in what's alive in the space now, what's here amongst all of us, and we can dance and weave for the next 90 minutes.
Wonderful.
So, John, to start, what I'm curious about, and feel free if you want to introduce yourself to start. Everybody here is holding a vision, an initiative, a project for their lives that they feel they're in deep soul alignment with. And the manifestation of that is in different phases for different people. But one thing that we all share in common is that those projects and visions that we're holding and stewarding are also part of an emerging culture. And we're calling that culture metamodernism. That's one word for it, at least. And so part of what I'm curious about is, in addition to our individual vows, in addition to our own developmental journeys, how can we come together as a collective in order to be in relationship with an emerging culture that we're all collectively source keeping?
Mm, wow, that's a great question. Um, hmm. Sometimes one of the ways I keep it simple is I think of three different levels of well, not even levels, three dimensions of coming together. And the first is which I think we all have, which is agreement. I think of agreement as functioning on a personality level. So I think everybody here agrees that we have a lot that we agree upon. And there's enough agreement there for all of our personalities to be sitting in a room together. Enough agreement to get on airplanes, enough agreement to drive cars. So I think we have that level. We have pretty pretty good agreement. The next level, of course, is related to coherence. And that's much more of a soul uh, quality, if you will. Right. So agreement is more the personality level. It's like the devil's in the details, the crossing of the T's and the dotting of the I's. A coherence itself, that's a whole nother process. And I'm imagining that to some degree, the fullness that all of you are experiencing in the field is an expression of that kind of the coherence of the heart, if you will. Um, so you have agreement, we have coherence, and the third dimension, which is like I think of that as being military grade, and that's got to do with alignment. Um, so alignment, and we can talk about, well, what does that mean? Alignment is what allows power to be applied, so to speak, because it has a kind of verticality. Coherent. We can all you can get agreement without coherence or alignment. You can get alignment often without coherence and agreement. We see it in the business world, right? The ability to apply to deploy resources and finance particularly comes through having like good alignment. Um, so alignment, in my mind, it's more military. It's more related to strategy, if you will, in terms of like, well, how do we get this? Um, how do from a and also alignment is related to a deep ignition in my mind around sacred world and actually aligning with the objective psyche. And what I mean by that is that there actually is a sacred world that exists separate from our own psychological processes, that we're not talking about psychology. We're talking about something that is quadratic, that is right, and therefore there is an objective sacred world that exists that has multiple.
Hey, we're back. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So I think of alignment as being planetary in the sense of understanding humanity as a dimension of something that is planetary rather than something that is just human. And that's also related. Those three dimensions are related in Buddhism to the Dharmakaya, the Sambhogakaya, and the Nirmanakaya aspects. Um, so alignment has to do with something that also transcends death itself. And I think to bring all of those into to bring those three into alignment, which is I think what you're kind of talking about. Well, I think that there is a that's some serious magic, right? It's not just a little thing to bring those three into. I think of that as like that is a uh, yeah, that's what we want. Um, Obviously there are certain things in the way because my sense is that what to some extent metamodernism is arising in a particular cultural time, but I think at the level of soul, time is not so linear. And so the story that has to hold those three factors has to be bigger than the one that we're telling ourselves about being meta modern.
Yeah, beautiful. And so can you just double click on that bigger story and how does that interface with the best story, the idea of best story wins?
Well, I think the best story here is in some ways the piece of collective magic that we're interested in is that stained glass window, right? But a stained glass window has to have structure to it, and it has to have integrity to it, and it has to be focused so that the light shines in a certain way. Um, so how does the story relate? How does ask me that another way? Sorry.
Well, I'm just wanting to distinguish some of the language that you're giving to us. And so there's the bigger story that you were just naming that transcends and includes the metamodernism, whatever else arises. So I was wondering if we can move into that territory. And then, yeah, there's also just a sense of after that, we all are sensing and feeling our way into the best story that we know how to live and embody imperfectly, but beautifully, moment by moment, individually and collectively. And how can we learn from you how to do that most wisely and beautifully?
Well, if we stay on the topic of story, and I think the first thing to say is that story is a language of the logos, just like mathematics or geometry or music, right? So when we say story, we mean something that actually, the collective unconscious responds to story in a powerful way. So we're talking about something that is related to like the objective structure of our own souls and of the planet itself. I think, when we look at levels of development, we're talking about stories, like stories in a house stacked on top of one another, and each of them is a story, so to speak. So um, we have a meta modern story. So I guess we could call that a turquoise story. But the truth is all the other stories are running simultaneously as well, but not just here, throughout time. So what I mean by that is there was a time where us sitting together like this was dangerous. Yeah. But in order to awaken qualities within us, we have to realize that that is also true. Now, meaning that if we want to like awaken the fullness of the soul and the fullness of the story, we have to recognize that time and space themselves are are part of the enchantment of disenchantment. They're part of the dream spell, and so we got to stack all the stories and all of the qualities that each of us were asked to cultivate in those various kind of phases of time, but recognize that they're all playing out here. And I think what happens to the extent that we forget that, we forget certain dimensions of the narrative, of the plot. We lose the plot, right? I mean, there is a dimension of this that is a love story. There's a dimension of this that is a quest. There's a dimension of this that's a comedy, and there's a dimension of this that is a tragedy and a war. And so I think, so it's the collection of all of those stories. Yeah. So I think that it's that we just have to, the best story, if you will, is the one where we gather up, you know, all of the parts of ourselves left back in time, and then bring the fullness of that to where we are right now, right? Because the enchantment of disenchantment is so strong, the effect of modernity is so strong that it has a magic all of its own, that makes it, I think it dries up some of the kind of deeper shamanic dimensions of what's necessary.
Yeah. Yeah, beautiful. I'll just say that some of the open spaces that have been hosted have been getting almost scientific in our felt experience and our lived recognition of the architecture of that wholeness, and when in that sense of alignment, and like really transmitting in very specific nuanced ways the felt lived experience of that, which has had a powerful effect of in a way creating not just coherence but also there's like a meta alignment that's happening when we can hear other people's stories and feel it as their lived experience in the moment. It's helping to repattern how that it lives in us as well.
Mm.
And
Mm.
yeah. Mhm. What's the next best step for what you sense in the culture at large, and then specifically maybe in the culture and that's amongst us, the collective that we are, to work towards bringing that best story forth in us and into the world, and in some ways recognizing how that best story is already alive here and now. Like,
Mm.
what's the way to take the fullness and the complexity of what you're pointing to and apply it into um, an action that we can live into, say, tomorrow morning as a group?
I think that the first the first thing I think is that it doesn't it doesn't happen without multiple keys being turned simultaneously. That's part of the lock, if you will. So that it is a group project. Even if you're sourcing a particular project, it is part of a group. It's we're all part of a group. So I think the first thing is recognizing that the we component is central, right? It's central. The other piece that I think we have to ask ourselves is, say, are we ready for the kind of revolution that needs to happen? Like meaning, as let's say the story reveals itself, are we ready to fully participate? And of course it's one thing to like say in your head, yes, but it's another thing in our, in our belly, right? In our belly. My grandmother, who was like a teacher of mine, she always used to say, well, and that's very well, John, but when the tanks roll in, um, like, how's your spiritual practice gonna, like, how's it gonna like hold up to that to that part of the mythic journey? And so I think that we have to recognize that that's part of it as well, like that we have to be strong enough for the tanks to roll in. And not that I want that to happen or that the need, but it is part of awakening, like our heroic altruist that actually has the capacity to make this happen. Because at least the way that I've understood it is we can only go so far, and then synchronicity, then there's some magic that needs to happen, right? And then the question is, well, how do we make that how do we make that magic happen tomorrow, right? I mean, how do we make that happen? And that has a lot to do with the depth of coherence of our heart and the depth of our commitment to what it is that we're doing, and to one another. The That the dynamism of synchronicity is an expression of the heart, and the anima mundi responds to that. So I guess the question is how do we love one another deeper and hold one another as brothers and sisters, um, in this?
Yeah, John, just some context for our gathering. It's on the 1 year anniversary of Hurricane Helene, which devastated, in particular, the town that we're in, Marshall, North Carolina. And yeah, so part of the vision and holding the gathering in this time was to be in relationship with the version of the tanks rolling in of a once in a thousand year hurricane, and to learn from the locals to help see the resiliency efforts firsthand, and to help also bring our money and time and love and awareness to this region, which is a big node in the meta network as well.
Hmm.
Yeah, I want to open it up. I'm curious what's brewing in y'all, and feel free to come up and ask a question directly into the camera. Daychen?
Hi, John.
Hello.
My name's Daychen. Um, I feel like I have a lot of questions for you. Um, I listened to your recent interview with Artem Zen, which was really lovely. And I guess maybe the first thing that I want to say is there's something that I would say a lot of us here have been participating in together over the course of years that I would describe as feeling like a kind of world building. Where we're kind of going back and forth between, as you say, this kind of disenchantment of modernity and kind of perhaps falling back under the spell of that, and then managing to come together long enough to kind of create the conditions where, coherence and alignment feel possible. So I think for me, for years, there's been this oscillation back and forth between entering the disenchantment and then this kind of world building. And in my experience, the other world that we're building is getting a bit bigger and stronger over time. But there's something about that feels connected to something I heard you say about modernity essentially kind of like drying up the DMT in people's brains and kind of depleting our inner shaman and making it harder to remember when we're in the disenchantment that this other thing is also real. So I think this is the thing that I'm wondering if you'd be able to speak to about like this kind of this oscillation, this painful oscillation. I guess the last thing that feels important to say is I think for some of us, there's a little bit of a sense that we're like it feels like we're participating in a lineage of the future. Like many of us are quite deeply rooted in lineages that already exist, but there's also something that kind of wants to come through us that's new. So I think I just want to share all that and see what you might want to say. And I'm happy to form it as a real question if you'd rather.
No, I'll reply as you like you asked. Like you. I think the first thing is that as part of our practice, the coherence that you feel in this circle, for instance, has to be part of your practice when you sit down away from it. Right. So what I mean by that is that that's part of the enchantment is like is related to the senses because the coherence that we all feel is not coming through those senses, is it? It's a different. So the first thing is to learn to keep that alive, and part of that has to do with the right use of the imagination, and so because if you don't use it, then you're not able to perceive through the realms, but you can't, but you have to separate fantasy from seeing, right? From the imagination as a faculty. So I think the first thing is realizing that part of the practice, to the extent that you do have a formal circle, that first that is the lineage. Okay, that's the first, because when you talk about lineages, I think what I think you're talking about is that you practice within certain practice traditions, but you're not wanting to create their worlds, that you're drawing upon practices from those traditions, right? So I think the really important thing to understand is that, or at least to work with as if, because in the beginning you don't know if what I'm saying is true or shite. So, the way that Carl Jung would recommend is you have to practice as if, because that's the way that you get to experience, that we all get to experience the psychoactive effect of various beliefs, and then from those beliefs, how you might behave differently if those beliefs were true. So you might behave very differently if you honestly believe that the circle that you're in, the lineage of the future, is right here, right now. And if you close your eyes and connect to that is actually real. Because the egregores, right? So the egregores are the subtle energetic structures. I think I was talking this with in that podcast. I'm like, well, if you're plugging into that, you're plugging into an egregore structure that built a particular world. And we're living in the cumulative rubble of that world, so that didn't work. Right? So, so whether it's a shamanic lineage or a Christian mystical lineage, or right, that those lineages actually aren't the one that we're really interested in plugging into. So the other piece then is you have to take the path. You got to take the fruit as the path. Otherwise, you're never going to get there. And so taking the fruit of the path is realizing that that what you perceive as being in your future, in front of you, is also vertically above you, but it's also inside, meaning that culture and civilization already exists. So let me say this way. Let's say it already existed. Okay, so let's say as an as-if experiment, if it already existed and it's in the process of externalizing itself into reality, but if the very structure and the problem from the perspective of the tradition is that your body mind isn't initiated enough, that doesn't mean that your basis of operation is not of, the right basis of operation. It means that your body, right? Your body has not been initiated enough to have a continuity of consciousness. That's everything that the tantras are about. They're not really about the development of the heart mind. They're about initiating the body mind so it can recognize these dimensions. So let's say that the civilization or project they were engaged in is less about trying to get the future and more about trying to let something be born that's already here. To what extent does that change how you are connecting to this story? I mean, does it change anything? I guess that's my question for you.
Yeah, does it change things for me to imagine that? Yeah, I mean, it's a significant thing what you're saying, that over time the initiation of the body makes us available for that thing to come into form through us. That's one of the things I'm hearing.
Well, it's happening, or what I'm saying is already happening.
Yes.
The problem is because the personality hasn't been initiated. The only way the personality can understand this is by projecting it into the future, because we don't have enough shamanic capacity to be going backwards and forwards between the realms and therefore have enough continuity.
Yeah.
But let's say you did, and when you left your body at night, you found yourself in an environment where all these meetings were happening and everyone's trying to work out how the fuck are we going to get onto Omaha Beach. If that was what was happening, right, that would be a different kind of story, I think, than the other one, which is basically a materialistic story. It's the best of the materialistic stories, but it's still an evolutionary story, and that's a good story. But it's not, that's a particular archetypal dimension around forward, which is very Western, right? We're very forwards and up and wide, and we forget back and down and in. And what I'm saying is that there's another piece to this, which is coming from the level of the soul and its story, which in my experience, and you'll have to try it on in as if, is as objective and structured as this realm is structured and objective. Yeah. And that, of course, and as you open to that, then you begin to open to the capacities, for instance, related to telepathy, meaning how do you connect this brain mind and that brain mind in such a way that they can start to, like, information can start to be transferred. But of course, it's difficult for information to be transferred if you haven't downloaded the software that has the belief structure that that's what's happening.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Very
Yeah.
beautiful. Thank you so much.
Sam Himes is about to talk, and I'll just say that Sam's one of the people that is designing and source keeping and architecting an imaginal practice psychotechnology to connect to that objective imaginal realm and live it now and also project it as the future that is also being born here and now. So it's fitting that he's asking the next question. I hope I did that justice.
Well, thank you.
Hey, Sam, it's good to see you again.
Yeah, it's good to see you again as well, John. See if I can feel into this question. I'm taking in what you just said and trying to hold that frame. Some with a bodily initiation and a kind of diaphanous ever presence, but then a kind of temporal dimension based on the context we're in. But you were using the phrase also in a recent interview, transrational, and I've been hearing that word come up a lot, and that feels really crucial here, transrational. And I don't know exactly where this fits into that kind of initiation of the body that you're talking about, but one thing that's seeming increasingly important to me is our faculties that we would describe as trans-rational that have a certain kind of felt sense or a certain kind of signal or a certain way it feels in the body-mind system that it maybe indicates a kind of alignment, a kind of direction to go in. Maybe like as the keys start turning, there's like something that it feels like. And I've started maybe getting a little bit of my own sense of what that feels like sometimes, but I guess I get a feeling that for a lot of us, I'll speak certainly for myself, where I seem to be oriented, there's a work of discernment around refining and articulating for myself what those subtle signals feel like, and learning to trust them more. Um, I guess I'm just kind of curious to hear from your perspective. I guess I'm curious about what this bodily initiation might mean, or if there is something from a certain relative level. If you have a take on some way of articulating what the trans-rational, how it arises, what it feels like, what it registers as. I often have a sense that for the modern mind, the trans-rational will include things that will just get grouped into subjective phenomena that are just like any other subjective phenomenon. We would disregard them because they're just subjective. I think you pointed to that when you talked about this like discrimination of the imagination, or this discernment around the imagination. There's an objective side to it. So I hope that's making sense. And I guess what I'm getting curious about is there something that feels articulable around what certain kinds of relevant transrational signals feel like on a phenomenological level?
Sure. Although, so I think the first thing is I just want to differentiate because when I don't think we're now talking about the body piece here. We're talking about the heart-mind piece because the body piece is like the icing on the cake, and by that I just mean like the ability to kind of see and interact with those realms. But actually, what's much more important is the heart is the heart mind dimension, which is the trans-rational heart mind. Because the body, you can still complete the journey, so to speak, without an initiated body. It's just like just doing it with your eyes shut. So in some senses, we're talking about, at least the way that we're talking about the intelligence of the heart mind here, and how does the heart mind know, right? I think that Uncle Ken, Ken Wilber, Uncle Ken used to say, I think one of his like little pithy instructions, and it's really true, is related to thinking wholes. So first you have to be able to think holonically. And then the next phase is kind of seeing. No, it's actually no, it's feeling. So feeling holonics. And what does that mean? Well, it means that like truth and beauty and goodness has a feeling to it. And so once you can think, the next level is feeling. And what does that mean? It means that you can pick up a book and read a few sentences, and you can feel if it's true and good and beautiful. Right. And it's like we have a human version of what Tom's trying to develop with the stages AI, right? Like that when there's an intuitive level of when you read something, you're actually analyzing the sentence structure and the perspectives, and you don't even know that you're doing it. So that's got to do with the feeling, like feeling wholeness, right? So feeling love. But it's not just a loving, lovey-dovey feeling. It's like because you know what wholeness, you can think of it, and now you can begin to feel it. And so if it has a holonic structure, it will resonate like that. And if it doesn't, it won't. The next level then has got to do with like the capacity to see it, see a ship. Right. So, and we're not like literally being able to see those holes functioning. And for me, when I talk about the way I conceive of wholeness here is a wholeness that is particularly centered on the intelligence of the heart. So once it's really about how to think in terms of love, wisdom, feel love, wisdom, see it, and then finally be it. Um, that has nothing to do with the shamanic capacity, because you could have, there's a lot of people now going into the 40 to 49-day dark retreat, and that's one of the processes necessary to initiate the body. But you can initiate the body without having any sense of the capacity to think, feel, see, and know love, wisdom. Right? So love, wisdom it's holographic, it's holonic, it has a resonant field dimension to it, it has a causal dimension to it. We're really talking about the understanding and the recognition of our planetary system as a holonic, as a logoic whole, with all of its dimensions right here, right now, all just like you and I have all of those dimensions. So I really think it's got to do with the depth, like the depth of our love, and by love I mean that's also the wisdom aspect, which is the depth of one's capacity to know the fundamental openness of everything and to feel the implications of that.
Yes, I'm appreciating this distinction between a kind of heart, mind, intelligence that has a resonance for the feeling of goodness, truth, and beauty. The bodily initiation shamanic aspect is still very trippy to me, but I'm getting the sense of it.
Yeah, it's trippy. So from a phenomenological experience, the body, the soma, is arising within your heart mind. So the first split is the splitting of awareness and love. Then you get loving awareness, you get love wisdom. But when you feel your body right now, you're not feeling your body. You're feeling how the body arises within the field of the heart mind. That has not got to do with bodily initiation. That's got to do with how deep has love penetrated into all of its fields of experience. So how saturated is your phenomenology in fundamental openness and love? And then what happens is you realize then the body is a body of love, right? And then the shamanic stuff, then the psychedelic stuff can happen inside of that. Yeah. And also because the love wisdom brings online the direct, valid, non-conceptual cognition, it brings online intuition. That's why, let's say, in the monasteries in Tibet, the abbots, the people who are running the show, they wouldn't initiate their bodies because they were too busy running the show, and they didn't need to because the heart mind transcends any kind of distance. So you can know it all from that kind of place. Because the transformation of the body takes time and needs very specific initiatory environments for that to happen in. Right? Like and you might not have time to do that for a few decades. Because what we really need is like a new sacred secular. We need a new Mahayana. We need a new like sacred secular operating system. I think part of the problem is we see out there is people are trying to get initiated when we don't even have like a fundamental sacred commons. And so there's nothing There's no platform for that to kind of, right? And really, because what we're doing is about a culture and a civilization, any kind of initiatory process that's individual, that isn't actually kind of like wired into the egregore of the we, is a distraction.
Mm. Mm.
I don't know, am I making sense?
It's clear, it's trippy. It's a lot for me to take in, to be especially the initiation of the body part, but I'm going to be digesting this for a while.
Yeah, in the tradition, they call that, at least in some of the traditions, that the Antakarana in the Theosophical tradition or the central channel, that's literally got to do with continuity of consciousness. Do you have continuity of consciousness between waking, dreaming, and deep sleep? Okay. Now there are levels of your psychology, what the Hindus would call the buddhi, or the intuition, or the direct valid cognition, that don't need continuity of consciousness, because if you understand that everything is empty, you can pick it up without actually having the continuity of consciousness,
mm.
because that's got to do with the body and the neuroplasticity and whether those pathways have been built. So the question is can we awaken those levels of direct knowing that don't need that? Not that we don't want to do it, but because there's a lot of things that need to happen. And if we're so distracted because we're taking so many psychedelics or what have you, right? Or then we're not going to see what's actually needed is the building of culture and right and
Yeah.
a collective.
Yeah. Sense.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, John.
John, just one follow-up point on that. One of the themes that has been arising in a lot of our discussions is around the way in which village allows for people to move into their specialty, into their mastery, into their soul vow. And not everyone has to have every single capacity online, because different people can hold different parts of the mandala. And simultaneously, we can all learn from each other and kind of raise our general, for lack of a better phrase, our lines of development to a sort of a baseline that can allow for an integrated wholeness within each individual, while also moving into the depth of our specialties. And that part of the challenge is that in our culture, we don't necessarily have that on a concrete level. Many of us don't have that on a concrete level. And so there's a way in which some of us are moving into work in the world that isn't necessarily financially generative in certain capitalism models, or there's a way in which each individual is feeling really stretched, because there's not the village to kind of hold them and also to help give their life force to serve something. And so there's like a seeking this to find the service in a way. And anyways, just a lot of those kind of threads have been coming up, and I know you've spoken to some of this in the past.
Well, right, because the spiritual task of modernity is individuation. That's the spiritual task, right? So that's the Hercules dimension. The Heracles dimension is around individuation and the necessity for individuation. Because clearly, if we're not individuated, we can't actually come into the kind of collective that's necessary, right? So, and of course, the shadow of that we're all experiencing is that we're on that heroic journey and we still haven't actually returned to the village, right? Because the village isn't a fucking metaphor. It's not like it's literally like those are the plans for Omaha Beach. It's like you need to come together in collectives. Like that's like, and they need to be formal collectives. And that's it's not right. And because that mythic cycle is actually describing a real process that's why we struggle because yes, we might be meta modern, but culturally we're not. Because that's like we're not because we're not in a we're not even we're not even in a tribe clan, let alone the size of village.
Right.
So now that isn't to say that the village can't be built remotely, but it has to be built as an actual ceremonial ritual structure that is actually an egregore that's actually like built so that you can at least, as we were saying earlier, sit down and enter into the circle, right? With it having some kind of formality. And that's a really important part of the Western tradition related to ritual magic and how, the whole tradition of lodges and all of that was developed. So I think we are all struggling, not all of us, some of us are living together, but it's a reality that the story necessitates coming together.
Yeah. One quick follow up on that, and whoever's next, please feel free to just come up. There's been some conversations happening in the past couple of months with many of the folks here around, there's those who have done maybe an individual cycle of the hero's journey, and then it kind of gets to a point where there's another leap that needs to be made into more of a collective hero's journey. And there's this very concrete practicality of like, okay, there's a possibility of living together physically, and that invitation is there. But then I own a house, or I have an elderly person I need to take care of, or my job as a therapist in person and I can't necessarily leave that all. And I don't have the savings to take a year off and like refigure out that career. And so there's this place in which people feel like their heart is fully connected to this deep river of an evolutionary potential that they know is possible and is already here, alive, imaginally, and in our heart minds. And then there's the concrete practicalities of like needing to either be pushed or leaped or something in order to make that actually a lived reality.
And there's the reality that not all the troops move at once.
Right.
Meaning, if what we're describing, at least the way that I experience it, we're talking about something that is already here, kind of vertically or in an interior way. What that means is um, if life circumstances haven't like eased up, then you want to. That's the importance of then living inside of the mandala. The, because what we're talking about is the world system itself. Like, some of the old traditions would say that there's like within the circulating folds of the kind of planetary intelligence that this is, there's about, what is it, like 60 billion individuated like sparks. I don't know what the number is, but the point is you're talking about the planet as a big organism that is going through a massive process and so the view is super important to understand that we're talking about something that is a changing of an age, right? It's a bit, we're talking about, we're entering peristalsis. Peristalsis might be 150 years long, right? Like we're talking about processes that are really big, really big. And at the same time, then we also have to recognize that we're like in the place that we're meant to be. So that's the way that I work that. Like, you can't, if you try and like pull up the chain and life circumstances, you also have to say, well, hang on a second, what's also trying to be taught here? Because the truth is if you really, to the extent that you really have signed your name on the dotted lines, adversity is as much an important part of this process as ease. And then it might be that you need another 3 years by yourself. Like life is like that's a necessary part of the process. So I think it's really important that you don't let that if life circumstances make it difficult. I mean, there's enough of like, okay, facing the challenge, but there's also like, okay, there's something here about having to work with the circumstance that we're all in.
Yeah.
And I think that if the story is just the story of the personality, and oh my gosh, if I don't, then I could see then there's an urgency because the personality is going to get squashed like a bug, right? It's gonna rot, it's gonna die. So without that mythic dimension to the story, and by mythic, I would, in my mind, we're talking about a multi-incarnational narrative. Without a narrative that can hold, I think it's difficult. We end up torturing ourselves.
Yeah.
Hi, John.
Hello.
Okay. Hi. So we're talking today with Steve March of Alethea about source keeping, and he was encouraging or bringing to light an unfolding relationship with what we're source keeping, with the creative process. And it was really resonant. And I am also really resonating with this kind of mythic, big picture, long game, best story. That there is something really big, planetary happening here. And yeah, just curious about where you feel those integrate in how we approach something that we're source keeping, and I'm feeling that there's something about where they integrate, which is all of us here connecting to a greater all of us. But curious, yeah.
You mean the juxtaposition between, let's say, something that is dynamic and unfolding and emergent, and something that is, and something that is like
Yeah.
to be?
Yeah, the design process, kind of the creative process, the design process, and
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that's where you need a lot of stock. And what I mean by that is you need to have your transpersonal psychology and right. And so the wisdom, Steve's saying in terms of well, things are emergent. Well, that's true. There is a dimension of this that is the ever present now, and that everything is arising out of that. Yes, that's true. And it's true that we experience spring, summer, fall, and winter. So it's also true that there's a wisdom related to understanding time, not just as an emergent now, but like, hey, guess what? This time next year at the same time, it's going to probably get dark at a similar, right? So that's also a wisdom.
yeah.
And so how those two wisdoms like play with one another, that's got well, yeah, that's part of the art, right? Because any kind of process, if you're giving birth to a baby, you're going to be giving birth to it like there's a process that's happening, or you plant a seed and it's going to grow and it's going to go through certain kind of cycles. You kind of know that that's true. If you're a doctor and you take someone's pulse in Chinese medicine and you have a sense that there is a story that there is something that's going to happen, that doesn't mean that the emergent isn't happening as well.
Absolutely. And I think that there's something that I'm becoming more attuned to about visioning, and kind of maybe some of the things to take care with, be aware of shadow sides of visioning, and manifestation. Like what is the pace, what is the bite-sized piece that we can actually make happen when the task is big right now.
Absolutely. And I think everybody is learning that. I would imagine everybody is learning that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. If anybody here is holding a project and a vision, how one then simultaneously holds something and then also allows it to emerge is that's the whole, that actually that is the path. So I'm just thinking, well, the way, okay, so the ways that we work with that is by bringing the fruit right here. That's an important piece of it, right? In every tradition of manifestation, it's got to do with like you got to bring those fruits right here, and in the sense so that our nervous systems aren't being strained by the apparent gap between where we are and where we want to be.
Yeah.
And I think that part of what I hear you saying is when we envision something, we're here, we want to get there, it produces a kind of tension that makes it also more difficult to make wise decisions because we're not we are yeah, we're kind of strained, we're leaning forward slightly.
Yeah. Yeah.
So again, I think this is where the cosmology of what if this is actually kind of like a vertical process of letting something drop, so to speak. And so letting it come through like it's already here, and that part of that process is also the world system and its synchronic and the synchronic order. So like we have to we all have to apprentice ourselves to the nature of that dynamic unfolding without losing the sense of what the vision is.
Yeah. Yeah, there's something about the rational Western approach to the design process that's often very conceptual and like creates a complete end whole. And yeah, that loses that kind of like close somatic knowing. It's like it's almost false and like won't can't be like that. And so how to both be really in contact with that this best story, yeah, planetary turning, and like you right where I am now, we are now. Feels like
Yeah, yes, it has to be embodied. So the best story, the story is it's embodied,
yeah, yeah,
right? It's embodied. Um,
like feeling it imaginally here.
yes, I mean, so to the extent, for instance, that imaginal practices, let's say the generation stage practices, that the kind of the ones that the Tibetans use for this very process, in some ways, what they're doing is the visualization practice is designed to cancel out the fact that you are unconsciously visualizing that it can't happen,
Uh-huh.
right? So the function of the envisionment practice, and I've been speaking to some colleagues who are working on this right now and having, so to speak, in meditation groups, people going into that state and envisioning what that future is looking like and then comparing notes. And then beginning more and more, actually, they're beginning to have the same experience. So the imaginal has to be embodied. It has to be embodied, right? It has to be. It's a dimension. It is a it is a dimension of the body. It's what the old occultists would call the astral body. It right. And so if it's just in the head
Right.
and not in the body, then it can't be embodied, and then you can't apply the principle of getting there by being here.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. I had an experience last month of a month-long container that I dipped into and was like, this is that thing that I want to live in. And then hearing it crop up in many places from many pods, kind of a similar vision. And it just feels it's all swimming towards each other. Yeah, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we all face there is significant tension in the field right now, just like in the collective, right? Like that's a reality.
But it feels it's painful, but it feels like productive.
It is painful. Yeah, it is painful.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Hi again.
Hello.
So I'm wondering, I heard you say something that I felt really curious about, that I wonder if you might be able to expand on. You were speaking of temple tech and village tech. And I would say some folks here focus more on what you could call what happens in the temple, and others more about what happens in the village. And I think it's just a simple desire to kind of hear you expand on what you meant by that. And yeah, I think that's it.
So my sense is as part of the there's a necessity for a strengthening of a sacred commons. That with the disintegration of, let's say, Christianity in this civilization, we've lost that third place. We've lost the function of religion, so to speak. So essentially what is needed is a new Mahayana, right? And what I mean by that is a new social socially a new practice that is done interpersonally, but the village tech essentially is what is enough of that tech, and by tech would mean the kind of contemplative tech and the we space tech. What is enough necessary to be able to get agreement and coherence and alignment across communities? Because if we're not running the same software, we have a Tower of Babel. And one of the reasons why, let's say, the Tibetans were able to develop, or any of those traditions were able to develop, and ours wasn't, is because our mystics had different languages, and therefore there was never the ability to actually develop a science, because everyone was using, St. Teresa used a different language from St. John of the Cross, from Meister Eckhart. So we need to have enough agreement, and the agreement is the simple ways that we talk about certain things or come together in practices that bring us together. But if all of the kind of various transformative communities that there are propping up, they're all doing something separate, then we don't get a commons. Okay, so I think that that's a vital necessity. Now, then the question is, well, then how do you develop that? Well, when I say temple tech, so there is, as a teacher, and I'm sure that other teachers would say the same thing, but every single word that I use when I'm teaching is dialed in to maybe 1,000 hours of practice, and that word means something. It's a signifier it is a mantra, it is a sigil for something. So it isn't just a word. It's charged up, because words have morphogenic fields as well. So essentially, the temple tech is actually around, we need a new egregore, and it needs to have a new language. And in the temple, that gets quite sophisticated. But if you design something based on a resonant field model and on a holographic model, then the terms that you use in the temple, just a simple phrase, can be used out in the village. And when they're engaging in practices and they're saying certain things, it will invoke and evoke certain energies, because they have been designed to do that. And even if you didn't know that, by doing that, you're beginning to participate in something. So there is a way that traditions are built down to the spells, down to how you spell something, and the grammar, the grimoire. And that isn't just fantasy. That's the way that you actually build egregores. So there's a need for, on the village level, right, in the level of kind of, hey, let's build communities and let's like that level, enough of a common open source language and set of basic practices. But if they're designed so that they actually intersect with temple, i.e., practitioners who all they are doing is they are maintaining that egregore, and that's the function of a priesthood, then you're creating a kind of cultural civilization, cultural engine. To the extent, then, for instance, that in the temple, where there are practices that we don't do necessarily in polite society, but to the extent that the practices related, and particularly because of the amount of time needed to be invested in depth of practice, but to the extent, for instance, that practices are designed to generate bliss, and then to the extent that the bliss is encoded into a language, that's how you create a kind of planetary Pentecostal possibility. How do you create the possibility of something unfolding meta-modern, but it's built on actually meta-modern spiritual tech, rather than what we haven't yet built spiritual tech that's meta-modern. We're still using lineages from the past. So when we say temple, we're saying, like, basically, yeah, that's the lineage tech for what the meta-modern thing is. And I don't think that we can actually, that's how all of these traditions work. The thing is they take 1,000 years to do it, and we don't have that time, so we have to use design principles, if that may, to actually design our way into that.
Yeah. Maybe I don't know. I just want to say when you were speaking of how it works at the village level, where there's all these separate practice communities that are practicing separately that have different language, I was really interested in that because I've noticed, especially in like the integral space and the meta modern space, there's a lot of like a duking it out about whose language and whose terminology is going to win. From my perspective, it seems to be become about domination or something. But what you're talking about, of course, is it comes through so powerfully. Anyway, so does this make sense what I'm saying?
Yeah, well,
it's a
that
concern. It's a concern, I guess, I would have about trying to kind of, I guess it's something about like monoculture versus polyculture, but having enough language agreement. Anyway, so a lot came up when you were
well,
saying.
I think that's got to do from a mimetic point of view of not, the turquoise can still hang on to some shadows of green if we use like a kind of mimetic model. Um, we're not talking about monoculture because we're talking about, let's say, English. Well, I mean, you're talking about the necessity for a language. I mean, there will be some kind of mono piece to it because that's what a civilization is. Now, granted, things will might fragment, but even so, without that kind of cohesion, I think it's difficult to develop culture or civilization. And that's where the planet is. The planet needs something that has a deep structure to it that can be that many different approaches can use that language. I don't think integral is the one because no, because I don't think it's understood its kind of colonial like biases. That's not to say that things like aqua won't be part of that, but it's also, in my mind, the development of that in itself is a group project. Right? It's not like, and so to the extent that like, well, this is going to win out over that, no, right? But it does need to happen in a particular kind of cultural environment with a particular kind of hygiene. and a particular kind of understanding of how mandalas are built. Like that, there's a particular kind of, let's say, sacred architecture process that we're talking about here, that when done the right way is sacred and ceremonial, and even how we go about doing it.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
And I just have one piece about, you said in a podcast with Layman that a form of, I'll call it meta-modern deity yoga practice, is our mythopoetic identity, the mythopoetic that we are living into, devoting ourselves to, and that can happen individually. And I think what we're trying to do here is to be in devotion to the collective mythopoesis that is living through us. And I was just wondering if you could tie that in as well in our last 10 minutes.
Well, I think that I mean, in some ways, one of the beauties of the AI can allow us to do is to gather all those to gather all those individual mythopoetic stories and begin to weave them in an ongoing way into something that's like, like what's going on with what's the story of the village or the tribe, so to speak. So that we do need there must, in some ways that we do need the story that weaves all of our stories together in a deeper way, in order for magic to happen. I think there's a whole process about how that happens. From a kind of temple perspective, and this gets a little difficult, a little sticky, but if we're talking about, there's also got to do with, let's say, I don't even necessarily want to go there, but there's a reality around like levels of initiate, like levels with which these stories are coming from, and which stories are inside of other stories. Because the truth is, we're not, like that. It's important to recognize hierarchy, and we're talking about, in some ways, the building of the cathedral, and the building of the cathedral is, in terms of a spiritual metaphor, is Masonic. And so we're talking about a particular kind of archetype, right? It's not the same thing as, there's a place for the rock and roll shaman, right? And there's a place for the seer, there's a place but here we're talking about something that is quite structural. And so the other question is how are we with working in hierarchy? Yeah. I don't see how there's any way of getting around that. And I think everyone, I think that that's a reality. That until we work out how to do that, so to speak, I think it's going to be difficult, because we are, yeah, I think that's a reality. That doesn't mean like single people, but it does mean that there are kind of levels, stages, or stories. Yeah. Yeah. I think that's been, in my own journey, for instance, with my own mentor. I mean, part of my own thing was like, well, okay, who can I serve? Like, because of course, within the way that I experience sacred world, and how the technology works, so to speak, is that, when we are gifted, so to speak, a download, something to source, we tend to personalize it. It's just that, like, um, and I mean, there's a whole kind of technology around how that needs to be held in different chakras, so to speak. But within the worldview that I'm living in, these are all part of a single story. But the question, but one has to work out like how they're not structured necessarily horizontally, you know? I mean, some of them are, but some of them are also vertical, meaning you might actually like be holding the piece that sits inside somebody else's story. And are you okay with that? Or is it like My Little Precious? Yeah. Like, so I think that that's, being willing to serve in hierarchy is part of that.
Mhm.
And that's one thing, it's one thing if like it's like some Tibetan guy or some like, Amazonian shaman with a rattle, because we kind of like it's different than if it's us. That's a little bit more like edgy, you know? And so yeah, so I think that we're gonna have to, I think that has to be worked through. Um, and then just to speak to what Ari just brought up, I mean, because this is a civilizational building process, what we're talking about from the macro level is the birthing of a planetary university. Like that's what a integrated planet is. It's a learning organization, a learning organism. So that's the 300 years. But where does that start? Well, that starts with a holon of that. And what is that? That is a school. Because when you have a K to 12 school, right, that's a journey. And then you have all the parents going on the journey, and you have all of the support structures needed to actually make that happen. That kind of size of school at a conventional level is about 5,000 souls. And the point is that one of the challenges that we have is like is this peer, like we're stuck in little peer silos, right? And not realizing we have to pivot and serve the younger generation. That's the really important part of it. Is like you got to serve down, you got to serve up. Like where do we fit inside of that dharmic culture? And the truth is that dharmic culture would be around. It's an educational culture because that's actually all of that all of us here love is we all love to learn. I think that's we could like there's not one person here who doesn't love learning. I think that's what we're, and I don't mean book learn, the full experience of learning. And of course, to the extent that we can be participants in a culture of learning, that's what the whole on is. Because whoever cracks that in the next 30 years, right, and open sources that, because that's the all of the rituals and ceremonies, because that's the way that you get it into the family. That's the way that you get it into the family. And that's the way that you generate that kind of toroidal field of learning. So yeah, I think that's at the very heart of it.
So, John, if people want to learn more with you, what is the best way to tap into your school, your teachings?
Oh, thank you. Um, well, yes, if you go online to Planetary Dharma, um, .com, and we have some intros. I think there's one coming up in January or something like that, and we have some. Is it January?
Embodying the open ground in January.
Well, there's that. Yeah,
An intro in April.
Oh, April. Okay. So we do have open retreats. There's one in January that really teaches a lot of the contemplative processes and for people who are interested. And our next cohort would be in the fall of 26. But if people come to our website, there's all kinds of ways of interacting with what we're doing. And I think I would love at some point to be in the room with you guys.
Yeah, we'll make it happen.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much, John.
Oh, look at this. Take care. Thank you, Tucker.
Thank you. Bye.